The house was old, older than I had expected when I first signed the lease. At first glance, it seemed like a perfect place to live, quiet, remote, and with an undeniable sense of character. I had always been drawn to older homes, the ones that were full of history and mystery, even if they came with a certain sense of loneliness. When I moved into the house, I didn't think much of it. It was just me, a recent college graduate, trying to figure out the next steps in life. The house was located at the edge of town, tucked away between a dense thicket of trees, the kind of place you would drive past without giving it a second thought. And I didn't mind that. In fact, I liked the privacy. It was a 2-story structure built from dark, weathered wood, and the creaking of its bones seemed to echo through the hallways at night. But there was something about the house, something that wasn't right. It wasn't just the usual creaks and groans that old houses make. No, this was different. It felt like the house itself was alive. I didn't realize it at first. It started small, a knock on the door in the middle of the night. But when I opened it, no one was there. Then it was whispers coming from the walls. I thought I was just hearing things, maybe the wind or some kind of rodent in the walls. But over the course of a few weeks, things escalated. The first night I saw her, I thought I was still dreaming. It was well past midnight. I had woken up from a restless sleep, feeling uneasy, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't explain. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm myself. That's when I heard it again, a soft scratching sound. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but no, this was different. The sound was deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. I got up, my legs heavy with dread, and followed the sound down the dark hallway. It seemed to be coming from behind the wall, just beyond the corner. When I reached the spot, I stood still for a moment, listening. There was nothing. The house was silent. But then I heard it again, the soft scraping, like fingernails dragging against the plaster. And then a voice, low, faint, and desperate.
"Help me,"
it whispered.
"Please help me."
My stomach turned. I didn't know what to do. The voice sounded so real, so filled with anguish. I almost reached out to the wall to see if there was someone trapped inside. But something stopped me. An instinct. Something told me that whatever was behind that wall wasn't something I wanted to encounter. But it didn't end there. Over the next few days, I began to notice strange things happening. Objects would move on their own, nothing major, just small things. A glass that had been sitting on the counter one minute would be on the floor the next. A book that had been placed on a shelf would be found open, pages torn out, as though it had been rifled through. I would hear the voice again, but this time it wasn't just whispers. It was laughing, a low, guttural laugh that echoed through the walls. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of something in the corner of my eye, like a figure moving in the shadows. But every time I turned to look, nothing was there. Then, one night, I was woken by a loud bang from downstairs. I shot up, my heart pounding. It was the kind of noise that felt like it came from deep within the house, as if something had been thrown violently against the walls. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them seemed to make sense. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and went downstairs, every step feeling like it took me deeper into a nightmare. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The door to the basement, which I had always kept locked, was wide open. I don't remember leaving it open. I don't remember even going near it. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly approached, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. There was a faint smell now, a mixture of mildew and something more pungent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I peered into the darkness below. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. Nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. As I descended the stairs, the temperature dropped. The air grew colder and thicker, almost suffocating. Then I heard it, a soft breathing, ragged, like someone was struggling to stay alive. I shone my flashlight towards the far corner of the room, and that's when I saw her. She was standing there, just barely visible in the corner, her back to me. Her hair hung in tangled clumps, dark and matted, and her clothes were tattered and torn, as though she had been trapped down there for years. I could see the faint outline of her face, but it was pale and distorted, as though her features had been stretched and twisted. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then she turned toward me, and I saw her eyes. Empty. There were no pupils, no sclera, just two deep black voids where her eyes should have been, staring directly at me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. She opened her mouth, and the only thing that came out was the sound of scraping, like nails on a chalkboard, but deeper, more guttural. It was as if she was trying to speak, but the words didn't come out right, distorted and sickly. And then I heard it, the whisper again.
"Help me,"
it said, but this time it was louder, more demanding.
"Help me before it's too late."
The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing in as if the house itself was trying to consume me. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning in the dark. The woman took a slow step forward, her head tilting to the side unnaturally, the sound of bones cracking echoing in the basement. I couldn't look away from her. Her presence was suffocating, and I felt something deep within me, a cold emptiness, begin to take root. I realized with horrifying clarity that I wasn't just trapped in this house. I was part of it now. In that moment, the world tilted, and I felt something cold, wet, and smooth wrap around my ankle. I looked down, and there, emerging from the shadows, was a hand, a pale, deformed hand, reaching up from the floor, pulling itself out of the earth beneath the house. The woman's distorted face twisted into a smile, her mouth opening impossibly wide, stretching beyond what should have been possible. And in that moment, I understood the truth. She wasn't asking for help. She was luring me, pulling me into the walls, into the earth itself to join her. I woke up the next morning, back in my bed, drenched in sweat. The house was quiet again. I thought it was a nightmare, just a hallucination. But then I saw the marks on my skin, the scratches, the faint imprints of fingers around my ankle. It was real. I packed my things and left that very day. But even now, I can still hear her voice in the walls when I close my eyes. The whispers, the laughter, the endless plea. And I know it's only a matter of time before she calls me back. I don't remember the exact moment I first noticed it. I only know that it started small, just a flicker at the edge of my vision, the kind of thing you brush off as a trick of the light. But over time, Those flickers became impossible to ignore. They grew larger, more distinct, until there was no mistaking them. There was something in my apartment. I had recently moved into an old, dilapidated building in the city. The kind of place most people would avoid, but rent was cheap. And I didn't mind the history that seemed to ooze from every cracked tile and peeling wall. The landlord was strange, quiet, never around, but he seemed harmless enough. At first, everything seemed fine. The apartment was small but cozy, with a decent view of the street below. It felt like home, even though the floorboards creaked in places that made no sense, and there was an old-fashioned air to the place, like it hadn't been updated in decades. But then, it started. It was late one night, around 2 a.m. I had just finished a long shift at work and was sitting on the couch trying to unwind. The apartment was pitch black, save for the glow of the TV screen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavier than usual. I turned my head to the side, nothing out of the ordinary, but in the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow. Not just any shadow, but a figure. I quickly turned my head, but there was nothing. Just the empty corner, dark and silent. I convinced myself it was just the lighting, that I was exhausted and imagining things. But the feeling lingered. That crawling sensation at the back of my neck. The sense that I wasn't alone. Over the next few days, the shadow became more prominent. It started appearing in different corners of the room, just out of sight. I'd be walking through my apartment, and in the reflection of a glass or a mirror, I'd catch a glimpse of it. Something that wasn't there. Something that moved, but stayed hidden just enough to avoid being caught. It wasn't a typical shadow either. It was a man-shaped silhouette, dark and shifting, like a stain on the edges of reality. Every time I tried to focus on it, it would vanish. But I could feel it lingering, watching. I didn't want to believe it, but the fear gnawed at me. A week later, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. The kind of sound you only hear when someone is walking across hardwood floors, slow and deliberate. But when I opened my eyes, the room was dark and still. I sat up in bed, heart pounding in my chest, and listened. The footsteps continued moving closer to my bedroom. I thought about calling the landlord or even the police, but the thought made me sick. What if I was wrong? What if it was just the building settling, the pipes shifting, and the walls? I couldn't explain the footsteps. I couldn't explain the shadow. But I had to know. I had to see it for myself. I got out of bed and tiptoed toward the door. The sound of footsteps had stopped, but the air felt different, heavy. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could open it, I heard a soft whisper from the other side.
I'm here.
I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The voice wasn't loud or clear. It was more like a feeling that pierced through my skull, the kind that made your skin crawl. It wasn't just a whisper. It was as though the words were being pushed into my mind, invading my thoughts without permission. I couldn't move. My body refused to respond.
I'm watching.
The voice was closer now, just inches away. My heart raced, the world spinning around me. I turned the handle, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if something was holding it shut from the other side. And then I realized I was locked in. I spent the next several days in a haze of fear and confusion. The shadow, the whispering, the footsteps, they all escalated. At night, I would hear the voice. Sometimes it was just a murmur, too soft to understand, but other times It was clear, crystal clear, like it was standing right next to me.
You will never leave. You will always be mine.
It started to follow me. I'd hear it in every room, feel the presence at my back when I was cooking or watching TV, and every time I turned to look, there was nothing. I started locking all the doors and windows, convinced that someone or something was coming for me. But it wasn't just the voice or the shadow anymore. The fear had become physical. I'd wake up with bruises on my skin, scratches that looked like they'd come from long fingernails. And I started noticing things missing, little things at first, my keys, a sock, a spoon. But then it escalated, my wallet, my phone. I'd search the entire apartment and they would be gone, only to find them hours later in places I was sure I hadn't left them. The worst part, though, was the smell. It started as a faint, sour odor, like something rotten, hidden deep within the walls. But as the days went on, the smell grew stronger, more nauseating. It filled the apartment. It became all I could smell, all I could taste. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to leave. I packed my things, planning to get out of there once and for all. But as soon as I stepped out the door, I was met with the darkness. The hallway was impossibly long, stretching further than it should have. The stairs, when I tried to descend, seemed to get taller, endless. I turned back to my apartment, but the door wouldn't open. The apartment wasn't even there anymore. Instead, the hallway led me to a room I didn't recognize, a small, cold room, completely empty except for a single chair in the middle. The voice echoed around me, louder now, closer. It whispered my name.
I'm always here. You will never leave.
I tried to scream, but the air was thick. It pressed down on me. I could feel its cold fingers creeping around my throat, suffocating me. The watcher had finally caught me, and no matter how hard I tried to escape, I knew there was no way out. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. I don't know if I'm still alive. All I know is that the voice is still with me. It's in my head. It's in my thoughts. It whispers constantly, following me wherever I go. And every time I look into a reflective surface, I see something else, something that shouldn't be there, something with my face, but twisted. Its eyes are hollow, its mouth stretched into a grin that never ends, and it's always watching. I've never liked the woods. There's something about being surrounded by endless trees, the canopy above swallowing all the light, that makes me feel small and vulnerable. But for some reason, I thought spending a weekend at a secluded cabin would be a great way to relax. Looking back, I should have known better. The cabin belonged to a coworker who insisted it was the perfect getaway. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just peace and quiet, she said. I thought the idea of being unplugged sounded nice. It took me almost 4 hours to get there, driving deeper into the wilderness than I'd ever been before. By the time I arrived, the sun was already sinking below the horizon, and the shadows in the trees stretched long and dark across the dirt road. The cabin was simple, one room with a bed, a small kitchen, and a creaky old porch. There was no electricity, just a few lanterns and a wood-burning stove. It felt isolated that first night. I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside seemed amplified. The rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional snap of a branch. I told myself it was just the wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel path that led to the porch. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The sound stopped just outside the cabin. For a long time, there was nothing but silence. Then came the knock. It was soft, almost polite, like someone didn't want to wake me. I stayed frozen in bed, holding my breath, hoping whoever it was would just go away. But the knock came again, this time louder, more insistent.
Hello?
A voice called out. It was deep, raspy, and unfamiliar. Who's there? I shouted, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. No answer, just silence. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, it was morning. The sunlight streaming through the window made me feel foolish for being so scared. But when I stepped outside, I saw them, footprints in the dirt, circling the cabin. They were huge, far larger than any person's, with long claw-like toes that dug deep into the ground. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it must have been a bear or some other animal, but deep down, I knew better. I should have left then, but something kept me there. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe I just didn't want to admit how freaked out I was. The day passed uneventfully. I tried to distract myself by exploring the area, but every time I stepped into the woods, I felt like I was being watched. The trees seemed closer than they had before, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I found myself glancing over my shoulder constantly, convinced I'd see someone or something standing there. But there was never anything, not until that night. It started with the tapping. At first, I thought it was just the wind rattling the windows. But when I looked, I saw a shadow moving just beyond the porch. It was tall, taller than any person should be, and its limbs were impossibly long, stretching and twisting in unnatural ways. The tapping turned to scratching, nails dragging across the wooden walls of the cabin. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. Then came the voice.
Let me in.
It was the same raspy voice from the night before, but this time it was right outside the door. Go away, I screamed, grabbing the fireplace poker and clutching it like a lifeline. But the voice didn't stop.
Let me in. I'm cold. So cold.
The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like whatever it was trying to claw its way inside. I don't know how long it went on. Minutes, hours. It felt like an eternity. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence was deafening. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the cabin, clutching the poker and staring at the door, waiting for it to come back. When dawn finally broke, I grabbed my things and ran to my car. But when I opened the door, I froze. Scratched into the metal, in long, jagged letters, were 2 words. See you. I didn't look back as I drove away. I don't know what it was, or why it chose me, but I know this. It's still out there. And every time I pass a wooded area, I can feel its eyes on me, waiting